The spacesuit. So many problems to be solved, sighed the little mouse, but he did not allow himself to be discouraged. The first step was to find a way in which he could simply survive in space. He would have to wrap himself up safe and warm and take enough air in his luggage to be able to keep breathing. It could work, he squeaked through his whiskers, and he made a little drawing. Next, he would need some building materials, a lot of building materials, and he already had a good idea how he could test his spacesuit. The space catapult. The spacesuit worked. The test was a complete success. The mouse would be able to breathe in space just as he could underwater. But the test must have given the goldfish the shock of his life. The next task was a lot more difficult. How can one get to fly so high, to take off from the Earth and fly to the moon? Balloon? Airplane? For days and days this question went round and round the little mouse's brain. Perhaps it might work with a big sling, or some kind of catapult. Once again, he made a little drawing. I need a strong metal container and a lot of rubber bands, or something like that. It turned out to be simpler than he'd thought. All he needed was to adapt an alarm clock and get hold of a pair of tights. In no time, he was sitting inside his brand new space capsule, ready for the first test flight. With a quick pull, the little mouse released the anchor. Boing! The elastic tights straightened to their full length and catapulted pilot and space capsule high into the sky. Everything was a whirl. The acceleration pushed the little mouse hard against the pilot's seat. "I'm flying!" he shouted, although he hadn't a clue which way was up and which was down. The space capsule zoomed in a high arc over the roofs and chimneys, but inevitably the capsule began to lose impetus. "Oh no! Have I stopped flying? I'm falling!" cried the little mouse in dismay. With a great effort, he bent forward and pulled on a string. There was a whee and a whoosh, and a white cloth shot out of the back of the alarm clock, putting a brake on the downward dive. The Rocket Mouse. The little mouse was still furious with himself for not having been more careful, because in fact the rocket had worked perfectly. The engine was unbelievably powerful. It didn't need wings or wheels or anything like that. He wanted to try again. His rocket design looked extremely promising, and he had also found a new hideaway for himself. He had a fireplace and a chimney which he could try out as a launching pad. First, though, he needed to get some new parts, but his thieving expeditions were dangerous. Men in long coats and dark floppy hats were popping up and sniffing around all over the place. What the old mouse had said was true. Humans were out hunting for the little thief and arsonist. The rocket was almost ready. It stood there sparkling in the soot-covered fireplace, a tower of silver cans, each with its own engine. One by one, he would fire them and shoot the capsule up to heights that had never been reached before. With a metallic click, the top section snapped shut, all ready for takeoff. The little mouse slipped into his spacesuit. The rocket was full of fuel. Cheese, bread, and water had been safely stowed on board. The mouse reached for his space helmet. Suddenly, there was a rattling sound on the staircase leading to his front door. "Darn, the floppy hats!" moaned the mouse. The humans had found his hiding place. Panic-stricken, he raced back through the front door, skidded across the smooth floorboards, and reached the fireplace with seconds to spare. Dogs came chasing after him, barking and growling, and the floppy hats shouted things he couldn't understand. He grabbed hold of his helmet, raced up the ladder, slammed the hatch behind him, and pressed a large red button. The capsule groaned and began to shake. The pressure forced the little mouse back hard into his seat. He could scarcely move. With a loud hiss, the rocket shot up through the chimney shaft and then through the chimney itself. A huge flame blazed from beneath the rocket, leaving a cloud of thick smoke behind it. The floppy hats were left standing there, faces black with soot. They crowded together at the windows, pressed their noses flat against the glass, and watched the sparkling rocket fly upward with the little astronaut on board. The mouse had escaped, but when they searched his hideaway, they found something else. The rocket sled. "That was a disaster," moaned the little mouse, sitting in his capsule. It was anything but simple to get back on solid ground. The alarm clock was still dangling high above the busy streets. The parachute had gotten tangled up in a cable. The little mouse tied a few strings together to make a long rope and climbed out of his open-air prison. One thing was certain. A catapult would never fire him up into space. Night was falling when the mouse trudged home between the tall rows of houses. Suddenly, there was a hissing and a flashing and a banging, and bright lights lit up the sky. Fireworks! When he had recovered from the first shock, the little mouse looked for a suitable vantage point from which he could observe the colorful spectacle. And then he had an idea. The little mouse fastened the last strap. The rocket was now firmly attached to the underside of the roller skate. All he needed was one more set of wings and a long ramp. He was putting together the last few bits and pieces, the control column and the firing mechanism, when suddenly there was a loud crackle and sparks began to fly. With a terrible roar, the engine fired. "Oh no! Not now!" The rocket sled shot forward. It hurled across the room, spitting smoke and flames, and crashed into a pile of books and junk. A thick cloud of black smoke billowed out of the windows. The whole attic was in flames. At lightning speed, the fire cut through the dry wooden beams. The notes and drawings on the walls instantly turned to ashes. The terrified mouse could rescue only one of his designs from the raging inferno. Down in the street, sirens were wailing, and men in big helmets were shouting to one another. "What a catastrophe," whispered the little mouse. Everything had gone up in flames. All his notes, the rocket sled, and even his telescope. Sobbing his heart out, he crept away from the scene, sadly dragging behind him the one design that he had been able to save. The giant telephone was not easy to use. The little mouse needed all his strength to dial the numbers. Ring! There was a ringing sound, and then a familiar squeaky voice answered at the other end. It was the old mouse from the museum. "I've heard what happened. Are you all right?" the old mouse asked in a worried tone. The little mouse told him all about his adventures from his first attempt to fly right through to the disaster with the rocket sled. "You must take more care," the old mouse warned his young friend. "We mice can easily get hurt." They talked for a long time. "And one more thing. Be on the alert. The humans have got their eyes on you now."